The Rookery is a new dungeon we'll be facing in Season 2 of The War Within. The dungeon starts with a 31-minute timer, so as long as you complete the dungeon within that time frame, you will upgrade your key. As you start the dungeon, you'll encounter a few different mobs alongside a mini-boss. Cursed Thunderers will cast Lightning Bolt on random players. Make sure to interrupt this cast, as unfortunate overlaps could easily result in a death. You'll also find Cursed Rook Guards here. They will cast Crackling Crush on the tank. This deals heavy Storm Strike damage, so tanks will want to prepare with defensives. Quartermaster Korotite is the mini-boss we'll find here. He will target a random player with Bounding Void, launching 3 Void Orbs in the player's direction that will also return to their origin. Players must make sure to avoid these orbs or you will likely die. Korotite will also buff up with an Entropy Shield, deflecting all incoming attacks and spells from the front, so your group should position behind the mob to continue damaging. After defeating the Quartermaster, you'll click on one of the 5 Griffins to fly over to the other side. Inside the boss arena here, you'll find Unruly Stormrooks. They will cast an Energized Barrage on a random player. This deals heavy nature damage every 1 second for 3 seconds, so if targeted by this beam, make sure to pop a personal defensive. Cursed Rook Tenders will cast Lightning Surge, which must be interrupted. If successful, it will enrage a nearby rook with 20% increased damage and attack speed. Void Riders will periodically cast Wild Lightning, covering the floor with lightning swirlies that must be dodged or you'll be one-shot. They will also cast Localized Storm, pulsing out AoE damage to your whole group, so healers should be prepared for this and your whole group should use a personal defensive. Moving on to the first boss, Kyrioss. This boss will target all players with Crashing Thunder, dealing substantial nature damage to all players caught within the 8-yard impact, so make sure the whole group spreads here. You'll likely die if you overlap with another person. Immediately after, the boss will then cast Wild Lightning, covering a good portion of the room in swirlies that all players again must dodge. Upon the boss reaching 100 energy, it will jump to the center of the arena and begin channeling a Lightning Torrent, unleashing 4 beams of lightning that rotate clockwise that your whole group needs to dodge. If caught in the beam, you'll suffer fatal damage and get stunned for 6 seconds, so I'd recommend stacking up as a group and rotating with the beam clockwise. During this time, there will also be multiple lightning swirlies that must be avoided by all players. After this channel, the boss will cast a Lightning Dash at a random player's location, dealing huge damage to anyone caught within the swirly and knocking them back, potentially off the edge, so make sure that you're in a safe position. The rest of this fight is rinse and repeat until you defeat Kyrioss. After defeating the boss, you'll drop down onto the ledge beneath and click one of the feathers. This will slow your full speed and allow you to use the extra action button to quickly leap down the chamber. Down the bottom, there'll be more Rook Guards and Thunderers that we dealt with earlier, but they'll be accompanied by some other scary mobs. Coalescing Void Diffusers will cast Attracting Shadows, marking a massive swirly around them that will continue to pull all players in, and during this channel, the mob will pulse AoE damage to the whole group, so everybody needs to use a defensive here, and if anybody is caught in the cast at the end, you'll die. You will face 2 of these diffusers at the same time later that will chain their Attracting Shadows cast, so be super vigilant with defensives and keep yourself healthy. They also strike enemies with Arcing Void, dealing huge shadow damage to the targeted player, and arcing less damage to up to 4 nearby players. The targeted player should use a defensive. You'll also find Void Curse Crushers here. These mobs will leap to random players with Void Crush, dealing heavy shadow damage to anybody caught within the impact, so keep a loose spread when fighting these mobs. They will also afflict the tank with the Stacking Festering Void debuff that reduces the tank's healing received by 2% for 3 seconds. This can get scary at higher stacks, so make use of defensives and you can try and drop the debuff when the Crusher leaps to another teammate. Corrupted Oracles will curse random players for 8 seconds with Seeping Corruption. This curse deals ticking damage while leaving void swirlies that need to be sidestepped. Players should decurse this where possible, but if your group has no decurse, the afflicted player should commit a defensive. These mobs will also cast Void Bolt on random players, dealing large shadow damage, so make sure to kick this ability. After clearing out the hallway, you'll then find afflicted civilians that you can chain pull onto the next boss, Stormguard Gorren. These civilians will drop an instability puddle upon death that players must avoid. Moving on to Gorren then, he will leap to a random player's location with Crush Reality. This marks a swirly that everybody should immediately get out of, and upon landing, he will fire Void Pillars out in every direction that players must avoid, otherwise you'll likely die. He will also deal heavy party-wide damage upon impact, so healers should make sure everybody is topped in preparation, and Gorren will also leave a pool of Void on the floor where he lands, so make sure you're baiting the puddles well as they last for a long time. Gorren will occasionally cast Dark Gravity, pulling your whole group in towards him, so simply run against this pull-in to avoid being one-shot. Finally, Gorren will afflict a random player with Chaotic Corruption, applying 4 stacks of a ticking dot to them. The player with the debuff should commit a defensive for its duration, and upon removal, a charge will explode, causing a chaotic explosion, transferring the remaining charges to the nearest player, and leaving the previous holder with a vulnerability to the debuff. Players will need to make sure they are passing the debuff to the players without the vulnerability, so positioning is very key in this fight. If you do end up receiving the debuff with the vulnerability debuff already active, then you'll want to commit a big defensive. After defeating Gorren, we'll deal with our first Void Ascendant. This mob will again cast Void Bolt on random players much like the Oracle. This deals big shadow damage, so make sure to interrupt this ability. She will also cast Feasting Void, applying a ticking dot to all players at the same time as absorbing a large amount of healing. Use a defensive for this ability, and healers be prepared to quickly out-heal the absorb. Finally, the Ascendant will channel an Umbral Wave, repeatedly firing out Void Orbs in all directions, so be ready to continually dodge these orbs or you'll suffer lethal damage. After jumping down the mine even further, you'll find civilians that the tank just needs to pick up aggro on again, but also radiating Void Stones. They will cast Void Extraction, increasing their damage done by 2% for every nearby entity, so you'll want to burst down the civilians quickly here. However, this extraction will also reduce the affected enemies and players' damage by 5%, and this does stack. The Voidstone will also channel Unleash Darkness, marking the ground with several large swirlies that need to be quickly dodged, but be wary that these swirlies explode quickly. During this channel, the mob will also pulse out huge damage to the party, which can be very deadly if the Voidstone has high stacks. Commit a defensive here if needed. After this Voidstone, you'll need to clear the rest of the platform of mobs that we've already encountered, so if you need to, just go back through this guide. But finally, we can now take on the Voidstone Monstrosity. The boss will start the fight encased in a void shell that absorbs equal to 20% of its maximum health, so players will want to damage through this shield steadily, ready for the shield to drop. This is because upon removal, Stormride Vokmar, who's present with us in this fight, will hurl his Storm Hammer at the boss, causing it to take 100% increased damage for 20 seconds, so here is where you'll want to pop your offensive cooldowns and Bloodlust. Outside of this, the boss will afflict 2 players with Unleashed Corruption, dealing heavy ticking damage for 15 seconds. This debuff needs to be dispelled, however upon removal it leaves a void puddle that damages anybody inside, which will be problematic later in the fight, so players should run out of harm's way to get dispelled with this debuff. You'll also want to use a defensive here if you're not the one being dispelled first. Tanks will have to deal with and position well with the Oblivion Wave frontal. This deals huge damage to anyone caught within it, so the rest of your party must dodge it while your tank pops a defensive. I'd recommend to tank this boss from the left or right side to avoid baiting this frontal on your team, and I'd also recommend the DPS to split up and choose one side each, while your healer can freely roam in between, because this will make the boss's main mechanic much easier. Null Upheaval will cause the boss to slam the ground, dealing large party-wide damage and knocking all players back. Use a defensive for this slam, and this slam will trigger swirlies to spawn all around the room that players must dodge. But all players will also be marked with a ring around them that they need to place over the newly spawned spikes. Spread out here and make sure that all spikes are covered, or else a Voidstone Awakened mob will spawn that will make this fight infinitely harder. These mobs pose tremendous amounts of group-wide damage while active that will likely end in a wipe, but all players must immediately hard swap and try to kill this ad if any do spawn. But that's it for this boss, and that wraps up the Rookery for Mythic Plus in Season 2. If you're interested in my nameplates, they are from my free Play to profile, which can be found inside my Discord. The link will be in the description. And if this guide did help you or a friend out, then please feel free to drop a like down below, subscribe to your boy for more dungeon guides, and until next time, I'll catch you guys later.